Good evening, I'm David Kramer here with Alaska Weather. As always, please visit our website at weather.gov/Alaska. You can get any updates to our forecast or check out any watches, warnings, or advisories that we have out for the state. You can also call our weather info line at 1-800-472-0391. Get any updates to the forecast through that means as well. And you can email us at nws.ar.tvweather@noaa.gov. You can send us any questions or comments there. Starting off, we'll take a quick look at one of the radars that we have out over our area, which is the King Salmon NEXRAD. And we just want to let everyone be aware that there is going to be intermittent outages for that radar beginning Monday on June 18th, and that's going to last for 2 weeks until June 29th on Friday there. And we are going to have only intermittent outages, so it should be no more than 10 hours at a time on any given day throughout that time, and most of the time that it will be out should be for during daylight hours. So we do expect this to extend the life of the radars quite a bit, lasting into the 2030s, and should be good service after that. So just a little bit of downtime, this 2 weeks intermittent downtime for quite a bit of length to the radars themselves. We also have a winter weather advisory out for the northeastern part of the Brooks Range. That is for snow. They're expecting 3 to 8 inches of snow, with one of the highest areas of snowfall will be on the Dalton Highway through Adigan Pass area. We are expecting that to be in effect from 4 a.m. on Thursday until 4 a.m. on Friday. Again, that is a winter storm warning for snow northeastern Brooks Range. Taking a look at our fire danger, much of the northern part of the interior from the upper Yukon Valley out west, kind of skirting along the southern portion of the Brooks Range, that are out to areas north of Galena. For our satellite imagery, we'll start off in the very southeastern part of the state. We do have a weaker low bringing in some cloud cover and rain to areas around the Panhandle area. But as we get to south central Alaska, a lot of clearing. We see the clouds diminish in the early morning hours, but some showers starting to pop back up as we get into the afternoon hours. As we look further to the north, we can see a front starting to push through and bringing in some rain and some colder air behind that. Some areas seeing snow up along the Arctic coastline. And then finally, we'll look out west, out over the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands. Not a lot in terms of the high and mid-level cloud cover that we have on this satellite imagery, but as we move forward, we'll see that there are a fair number of lower clouds, some stratus underneath that, out over much of the Bering and Aleutian Islands area. So look now at the remainder of our today weather. With the high pressure pushing in from the west, we are seeing a lot of that lower cloud cover over the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands. We do have one system coming up from the North Pacific that isn't going to be big impact later today, but will have a much bigger impact as we move forward in the next couple days. Taking a look now at the southwestern part of the state, not a lot of cloud cover, not a lot of precipitation expected for the remainder of the day. But notice in the interior part of the state, we do have a lot of smoke coming in from the western part of the interior through all the central and eastern part of the interior as well. Moving up to the north around the Kotzebue Sound area, seeing some rain out ahead of the frontal system pushing down from the north. Behind that, some colder air bringing in a mix of rain and snow as you get closer towards the Barrow area. Along the Arctic coastline, a mixture of snow and fog up there, with some rain out in the northeastern Brooks Range for now. As we move down into the Panhandle area, we are seeing a lot of rain in between these two low pressure systems, bringing in, especially in those more northern locations up by the Haines and Skagway area. For tonight, we are going to continue to see rain in the Panhandle area, especially in the southern portions. Now we're going to see some of the heavier rain showers, and then again by the Haines and Skagway area with some lighter precipitation kind of in that Juneau to Sitka corridor there. South central Alaska is going to see primarily clear skies in terms of no precipitation, but we are going to have some showers over much of the Alaska Range, Talkeetna Mountains, and down those western part of the Alaska Range as well. Higher elevations could see some snow, but much of the precipitation should be rain, especially at lower elevations. In the interior, especially the central part of the interior, we're going to see smoke throughout the area, and that will start to push more and more over the Fairbanks area as we are going to have some westerly winds associated with this front coming down. On the southern side of the front and southern parts of the Brooks Range, expecting to see mostly rain, but on the northern side, we are expecting to see snow through all of the Arctic coastline, pushing down into much of the Brooks Range as well, with some areas of fog out by AKwx area. Down along the west coast of the state, from the Seward Peninsula down through southwest Alaska and the Bristol Bay area, not expecting to see any new precipitation. However, we are expecting to have some more fog develop overnight for the southern portions of the Bristol Bay area and out by the Pribilof Islands as well. Now on Thursday, we're finally going to see this front pushing up from the south, bringing in a lot of rain to areas of the eastern Aleutian Islands, Alaska Peninsula, and out by Kodiak as well. This is going to progress further and further to the north throughout the day on Thursday. Southwest Alaska should be pretty clear from that system, staying pretty dry, and that's going to be true up by the Seward Peninsula as well. However, as we move up along the Arctic coastline with that warm air coming in from the north, we are expecting to see quite a bit of snowfall up there, with the heaviest amounts again in the northeastern part of the Brooks Range, and a lot of that snow is going to be mixed with fog as well. Down in the interior, central interior, still expecting to see a fair amount of smoke on Thursday. And then as we move off to the eastern part of the interior, potential for some isolated rain showers to develop, especially in the afternoon hours. Down in south central Alaska, some showers popping up there as well, primarily in the mountains, but some of those could move in over some of the more low-lying areas. Then in southeast Alaska, primarily in the more inside waters areas, we are going to see some continued rain, but as this high pressure nudges a little bit more in, a lot of the areas along the Gulf should stay drier than the areas in the inside waters. Moving into Friday, high pressure continuing to dominate much of the Panhandle area, keeping most of the area out of the precip for now. However, this system will eventually bring some more rain to southeast Alaska. We do have some of that rain making its way into Yakutat on Friday, and all of south central Alaska, with the heaviest amounts right along the coast there, are going to see a fair amount of rain on Friday, and that's going to continue to push in throughout the day on Friday, with areas of Kodiak and southwest Alaska also seeing a fair amount of rain with this system moving north. Some of that rain is going to start to make it into the interior on Friday as well, seeing some isolated showers in much of the interior. But as we get into the Brooks Range, expecting to see some more isolated showers, a mix of rain and snow up there, and then snow along the Arctic coastline is expected for the remainder of Friday. Down by the Seward Peninsula, should stay pretty dry for those locations, and then we are going to see other portions of this front pushing through the eastern and southern part of the Bering Sea. That does include areas down by the central and eastern Aleutian Islands, as well as the Alaska Peninsula, as the main low pressure system starts to make its way closer to the eastern Aleutian Islands. For our low temps starting here Thursday morning, we'll stay out in the Aleutian Islands area down into the lower 40s for the most part. That does include St. Paul as well, getting down to 42 degrees for Wednesday night, Thursday morning time frame. Mid-40s for much of the Alaska Peninsula and into the Bristol Bay area, with Dillingham getting down to 44 degrees, King Salmon down to 44, Dillingham down to 45 degrees. In the YK Delta area, temperatures dropping down into the lower to mid-40s, a little bit warmer at Bethel, 46 degrees, expected low for tonight. And then as we move up to the Seward Peninsula area, Nome getting down to 40 degrees, but on the northern side, a little bit colder there, mid to upper 30s, with Kotzebue getting down to 38 degrees, Shishmaref at 35, and Gamble out there on St. Lawrence Island down to 37 degrees. Along the Arctic coastline, below freezing for all locations, 28 to 30 degrees expected for the North Slope area. Down into the interior part of the state, dropping down into the mid-40s for the most part, staying a little bit warmer there at Fairbanks, only down to 48 degrees, as well as Fort Yukon moving up a little bit more to the north. Down in south central Alaska, dropping down into the 40s for most locations, a little bit colder in the Copper River Basin area, with Glen Allen getting down to 40 degrees expected low tonight, along the North Gulf Coast in the mid-40s there. And then down in the Panhandle area, right around 50 degrees, a little bit warmer up by the Haines area, only getting down to 52 degrees for Thursday morning. For Thursday afternoon, temperatures getting up into the mid to upper 50s for southeastern part of the state, with Yakutat getting up to 56 degrees as well. In the 60s for much of south central Alaska, colder off to the east, with Cordova and Valdez getting up to 60 degrees for highs on Thursday. And as we move a little bit to the west, we are seeing corridor there anywhere from 66 to 68 degrees as the warmest temperatures for south central. Moving up into the interior part of the state, actually a little bit cooler than some of the areas in south central Alaska, seeing the lower to mid 60s there. Fort Yukon getting up to 66 degrees for a high Thursday afternoon. And along the Arctic coastline, most locations should get above freezing into the mid 30s. As we move to the Kotzebue Sound area, in the 40s for most locations, a little bit colder by Shishmaref there, 40 degrees expected high for Thursday afternoon. Around 50 degrees for the Norton Sound area, and then in the mid 60s for much of southwest Alaska and the Bristol Bay area. Down in the Alaska Peninsula, only getting up into the lower to mid 50s there, and mid to upper 40s for much of the Aleutian Islands, as St. Paul gets up to 46 degrees. Warmest there is going to be at 49 degrees, expected high Thursday afternoon. Dropping down for our low temperatures for Friday morning, getting back down into the lower 40s for the Aleutian Islands, with Unalaska getting down to 45 degrees, as well as Cold Bay. And then as we move into southwest part of the state, starting in the Bristol Bay area, temperatures around 47 degrees for Dillingham, King Salmon, and Iliamna. As we move up into the YK Delta area, temperatures in the 40s for the most part. Again, Bethel's staying a little bit warmer there, only dropping down to 49 degrees. Norton Sound area dropping down into the mid 40s, and St. Lawrence Island and Gamble getting down to 37 degrees. Lower to mid 40s for much of the Kotzebue Sound area. Up there by Point Hope, Point Lay areas, we are going to see temperatures dropping down to 37 degrees. And then below freezing for much of the Arctic coastline, with Barrow getting down to 28 degrees, being the coldest in the state for Friday morning. Mid 40s for much of the interior part of the state. Fairbanks again staying a little bit warmer, only dropping down to 48 degrees. Expected low for Friday morning. And down into the 40s for most locations in the south central area. Anchorage is the exception, only dropping down to 50 degrees, expected low for Friday morning. Mid to upper 40s for the most part, but Haines and Skagway staying a little bit colder, or warmer rather, in the northern parts of the Panhandle, dropping down to 55 degrees. For our Friday afternoon expected highs, we are looking at temperatures in the low 60s for much of the Panhandle area. A little bit colder as we get towards the coast, or up by Yakutat, only getting up to 55 degrees. In the lower 50s along the North Gulf Coast, but around 60 degrees as we get to the more interior locations of south central Alaska. Mid 60s for the interior part of the state, and just above freezing for much of the Arctic coastline. Down by the Seward Peninsula, getting around 50 degrees to the mid 50s there, into the lower 60s for the YK Delta area, lower 60s for the Bristol Bay area as well. And we'll be back shortly with the marine forecast.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Our aviation forecast will begin with areas of flying weather. We'll start off out west over the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands. For the Aleutian Islands, we do have widespread IFR and MVFR conditions out through all of the islands and then into the Alaska Peninsula as well. Some areas in the southern portions of Kodiak Island will also see some MVFR conditions for Thursday morning. Then as we move up the west coast, as we get by the Seward Peninsula, St. Lawrence Island area, we are going to see some MVFR and IFR conditions there extending up to the Arctic coastline, including the Brooks Range in that. We are going to see some MVFR and IFR conditions there. Down in south central Alaska and the Alaska Range and Talkeetna Mountains, we are going to see some areas of MVFR conditions. And then down in southeast Alaska, we will see some MVFR and IFR conditions there as well. On Thursday afternoon, going to continue to see a lot of those MVFR and IFR conditions, with much of the IFR being out over areas near the Gulf. South central Alaska still going to see some MVFR conditions over the mountains. And as we move up into the state, Brooks Range and areas further to the north going to continue to see IFR and MVFR conditions through the afternoon on Thursday. Dropping down the west coast of the state, we are going to see some MVFR conditions through areas around the Bering Strait area, St. Lawrence Island. And then down in the Aleutian Islands, going to see widespread IFR and MVFR conditions extending out over the Alaska Peninsula. For Friday morning, going to continue to see most of the Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula and MVFR and IFR conditions. However, between the central and western Aleutians, there are going to be some areas of VFR conditions expected. Up along the west coast by the Kotzebue Sound area, MVFR conditions expected, and then much of the Brooks Range and Arctic Slope area, we are going to see some MVFR conditions with some isolated areas of IFR, especially right along the coast. As we move down into south central Alaska, we will see some areas around Prince William Sound, along the North Gulf Coast, and in areas around Copper River Basin, MVFR conditions expected, and then MVFR and IFR conditions for southeast Alaska. Taking us into Friday afternoon, a lot of VFR conditions in more of the inside waters areas, but as we move out by the Gulf, we are going to see some MVFR conditions for the Panhandle area. As we move along the North Gulf Coast, going to see a lot of IFR conditions there, but as we move more inland locations of south central Alaska, expecting to see more MVFR conditions. Interior should be VFR, but as we get into the Brooks Range, MVFR conditions expected, becoming worse as we get closer towards the coastline, with IFR conditions expected along the coast. dropping down the west coast of the state through the Bering Strait area and down by St. Lawrence Island. MVFR conditions expected. Southwest Alaska should also see primarily MVFR conditions. Then Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, and eastern central Aleutian Islands all expecting to see MVFR and IFR conditions for Friday afternoon. A little bit further out by the western Aleutian Islands, expecting things to clear up a little bit with some VFR conditions expected out there. For our passes, starting up north, Anaktuvuk Pass should be IFR throughout the day, as well as Adigan Pass. Then as we move down to Lake Clark and Maribel should be VFR for Thursday, as well as Rainy Pass. However, Windy Pass will be MVFR, as well as Isabel Pass. Mentasta Pass should be up to VFR conditions for the day on Thursday. However, Tanita will be down in MVFR conditions. Portage expected to be VFR, and Chilkoot and White will both be down in IFR conditions throughout the day Thursday. Taking a look at our freezing levels, we have some areas of 6,000 feet near the Panhandle area. As we move out over the northern part of the state, some of those colder temperatures dipping down into western portions of the interior, 6,000 down to 2,000 feet there, and then surface freezing line along much of the Arctic coastline for Thursday morning, bringing in much colder temperatures up there along the north slope. Our 8,000 foot line drops through the eastern part of the Bering Sea and out across Kodiak Island. For our icing, we do have areas below 5,000 feet along the Arctic coastline, between 6,000 and 10,000 in the interior, and then between 3,000 and 7,000 over the northern portions of the Panhandle. For our jet stream, main part of the jet, 80 knots out of a westerly direction by Kodiak Island, and then dipping back down about 105 knots over the eastern part of the Gulf, and a jet streak moving over the northern part of the state around 95 knots. Taking us down to 9,000 feet, westerly flow over much of mainland Alaska, with the interior seeing the strongest winds around 40 knots there, and weaker flow 20 to 25 knots over the Panhandle. Easterly flow over much of the Bering Sea, 10 to 20 knots for the most part until we get down by the central Aleutian Islands, 35 knots there at 9,000 feet. Down at 3,000 feet, 10 to 15 knots easterly direction over much of the Bering, getting stronger as we get closer towards the Aleutian Islands, 35 to 40 knots over the central and eastern Aleutians out of that easterly direction. Out over the mainland part of the state, westerly flow, getting up to as high as 30 knots through the interior part of the state and Seward Peninsula areas, but dropping back down to around 15 knots as we get to the south central and areas of the Panhandle. Turbulence should be pretty limited, only out over the Aleutian Islands and Alaska Peninsula, below 4,000 feet expected there. This is going to increase throughout the day with the most turbulence in the afternoon hours. We will be back shortly with the marine forecast.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and we have a special guest in the studio today. We welcome Amanda Terborg of the Aviation Weather Center. Thanks for joining us, Amanda.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Amanda's flown in all the way from Kansas City, and for those of you that don't know, the Aviation Weather Center serves the lower 48 for aviators, just as the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit here in Anchorage serves all of Alaska. So I kind of wonder, what's the Aviation Weather Center in Kansas City doing to help out Alaska, Amanda?
Yeah, you know, we do a lot of collaboration work with our sister station up here. Lately, we've been doing a lot of work, especially in the satellite meteorology.
Okay.
In particular, we have been looking at ways to better identify icing conditions in clouds, which is a big deal up here because, as I'm coming to find out, even though I'm not from here, you guys have a lot of pilots here.
We have a lot of pilots. In fact, it's, when you say you can't get there from here, that's how you get there.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay, so with icing potential then, what's Kansas City working on?
Well, we are working on something that will help us, again, identify the icing in the clouds. You don't want ice on your aircraft. No. Not only does it add a whole bunch of extra weight to your airframe when it attaches to the wings and the nose cone, but it can also mess with your aerodynamics.
Right.
And in the most serious conditions, that can mess with it enough that you can actually crash.
It changes the shape of the wing, and that makes it sometimes impossible to fly, right?
It does, yeah. So we want to figure out a way to better forecast for that.
Makes sense.
Now this particular image is over Alaska. The colors here are a little goofy. It doesn't look like your run-of-the-mill satellite image.
Okay.
But the red is where you have liquid clouds and the blue is ice. But again, it really doesn't tell you a lot where you have icing conditions in that cloud. Because in those clouds there's little droplets, and they're cold, and they're actually below freezing, but they're still liquid, and that makes them sticky.
Okay.
So when an aircraft flies through there, those droplets are sticking to the aircraft, and it can happen amazingly fast.
Right.
And so that's what we're trying to find. And there is a product called the Aircraft Flight Icing Threat that does this. And it's basically looking at the temperature of the cloud, and it's also looking at the size of the droplets to identify a probability and intensity of those icing conditions.
Okay.
And if you flip to the next image, this is a case from Juneau, Alaska. where this probably wouldn't have been the best day to fly around Juneau.
Okay.
Now there was an area of moisture that pushed south from the southwest up along the coast that pushed in a stratus layer. And in the stratus layer, there was a lot of those supercooled liquid drops, or a lot of stickiness.
Okay.
And so the flight icing threat was able to, in the pinks and the reds there, was able to identify where that icing was. Now this is really cool. You know, it's really cool to be able to identify that. There is, you know, of course, caveats to every product. Much as we wish it would happen, sun doesn't shine all the time, unless, I guess, if you live in northern Alaska during the summertime.
Right, right.
But we need that sun to be able to bounce off those clouds and to be able to see where those supercooled drops are.
Okay, so it's a daytime only tool.
It is, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, right now, of course, you know, we're in the era of advanced satellite technology, and there is a satellite that can actually use moonlight to see clouds.
Yes.
And so sometime in the future, we hope to be able to do that.
Okay.
Another thing that is a bit of a challenge is multiple layers of clouds. You know, you can only see so far through a thick cloud.
Okay.
And if it's thick enough, sometimes you can't see a layer of icing that's below there.
Right, right.
But even besides those caveats, this product has a lot of potential to help out Alaskan aviators here.
Well, it sounds like a really big deal, and something that forecasters at the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit could use probably on a daily basis, and especially in the middle of a really big storm.
Yeah, I would think so.
Do you have a really good success story in the lower 48 using this tool?
You know, it's a fairly new product, and so we're still evaluating it. But yeah, we've had a lot of cases where we have seen that it does tend to capture those icing conditions.
Okay, very good. Well, Amanda, thanks so much for sharing some of the very interesting satellite imagery and the tools that you're using there at the Aviation Weather Center in Kansas City with us here in Alaska. People can probably find some of this information online, right?
Yeah, here is a website here. It's a page from NASA Langley, and they have this imagery as well as a bunch of other satellite imagery that you can take a look at.
Okay, great. And I'm sure our friends at the Alaska Aviation Weather Center and the unit will be using that in the coming months there with your training and your help there to learn more about that tool to help Alaska aviators any day of the year. That's wonderful stuff. So thanks again for joining us, Amanda, and we welcome you to view any of our Alaska weather facts on YouTube anytime at the address below, and we'll see you next time. And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back for the marine section. We'll start off with a quick look at the ice edge. A lot of clearing to areas along the south or northwestern part of the state. We do have some areas of ice that are getting a lot of northerly winds, so some of that ice is being pushed to the south. Not new ice forming, but ice that is on the pack pushing to the south, moving into warmer water that should cause it to melt. As we look at our marines for the areas in southeast Alaska, we'll look in the inside waters first, around 10 knots for winds, becoming southerly as we get further to north and strengthening to around 20 knots out of that southerly direction. In the eastern part of the Gulf, westerly flow 10 to 15 knots, strongest as we get further to the south. Then on Friday, becoming a little bit more northwesterly in the more southern areas of the eastern Gulf, around 15 knots there, and becoming more southerly in the northern parts of the Gulf, around 20 knots up there. In the inside waters, southerly flow 15 to 20 knots, becoming northwesterly as we move closer towards the Ketchikan, Metlakatla area. As we move into the south central area, southwesterly flow for the most part 20 knots by the Barren Islands, but as we get further along the North Gulf Coast, 10 to 15 knots there. As we look in the Cook Inlet area, southerly flow around 20 knots, down to around 15 knots out of a southwesterly flow near the Barren Islands. Then on Friday for the south central locations around the Barren Islands, 30 to 35 knots out of that easterly direction, seas around 9 feet. In Cook Inlet area, 15 to 25 knots, strongest as we get further to the south out of that northeasterly direction. As we look out over the northern part of the Gulf, easterly flow around 30 knots south of Seward, but as we get further to the east, becoming more southerly, 25 to 30 knots there. And inside Prince William Sound, easterly flow around 20 knots. For the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island area, southwest flow around Kodiak Island around 20 knots there, seas around 5 feet. So get closer towards the Alaska Peninsula, we have primarily an easterly component to the flow, 25 to 30 knots on the Pacific side, and then 20 knots on the Bering side. However, as we get closer towards Bristol Bay, a lot lighter winds around 10 knots, seas only around 1 foot. Then on Friday, an east to southeast flow, 25 to 30 knots for much of the area around the Alaska Peninsula and also around Kodiak Island area, southeast to east flow, 25 to 30 knots. Highest seas are around 19 feet, and that's going to be south of Sand Point. So you look for the Aleutian Islands starting on Thursday, northeasterly flow, 30 knots on the Bering side, 35 on the Pacific side with seas 12 to 14 feet. So look further to the west, flow becoming weaker as we get close towards the western Aleutian Islands, around 15 knots out of a northeasterly direction. Seas only around 8 feet further to the west. Then on Friday, flow becoming much more northerly, 15 to 25 knots, strengthening as we get further to the east, and seas picking up as well. On the Pacific side, we are going to see seas 17 to 18 feet. Winds all around 25 to 30 knots northerly for the central Aleutian Islands, but becoming more easterly as we get by the eastern Aleutian Islands. Along the west coast of the state, primarily a northerly component to the winds, 15 to 20 knots for the most part. South of Nunavik Island, a little bit weaker there, around 10 knots. Then on Friday, flow becoming slightly more easterly, 15 to 30 knots, the weakest up by Nome, and then as we get down the west coast of the state, 25 to 30 knots for the most part. As we look along the Arctic coastline, starting off to the west, 15 to 20 knots primarily out of a northerly direction, then up along the Arctic coast, 10 to 15 knots in lighter winds. 10 knots in light winds along the Arctic coastline on Friday, and as we look on Friday on the west coast, still pretty light, somewhat of a westerly component, 10 knots there, picking up as we get closer towards the Bering Strait, northerly wind component around 20 knots. Taking a look for tonight's weather, starting off out west, we do have high pressure out over the western part of the Bering Sea, keeping much of the precipitation off of the Aleutian Islands, but there are going to be some areas of fog developing around the Pribilof Islands and in the Bristol Bay area. Front coming up from the south, going to be a big rain producer, but not for tonight. As we look out over mainland Alaska, we have a front pushing in from the north, bringing a lot of snow with it. We do have a winter weather or a winter storm warning in effect from 4 a.m. on Thursday to 4 a.m. on Friday for 3 to 8 inches of snow for the northeastern parts of the Brooks Range, including the Dalton Highway through Adigan Pass. As we move down into the interior part of the state, we are going to see some snow that's going to linger and push more into the Fairbanks area as we move throughout tonight and into Thursday, with the more westerly component to the winds pushing that smoke out over the main part of town in Fairbanks. We are going to have some rain to the north of that ahead of this frontal system. Then as we drop down into the south central locations, some rain and snow in the mountains, primarily the Alaska Range and Talkeetna Mountains, with snow in the higher elevations and rain in the more low-lying areas. We also have some rivers near Bankful, the Gulkana River in the Copper River Basin that is near Bankful, but it is crested now and starting to diminish over the next couple of days. And we do expect some rain to continue throughout the night for the Panhandle area. With Alaska Weather, I'm David Kramer.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.